My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story I never wanted to tell. If you had asked me 5 years ago what could possibly end a marriage, I would have said money problems, maybe drifting apart, or simply growing older in different directions. I never imagined betrayal would creep into my life like a shadow I didn't see until it swallowed everything. And yet, here I am, telling you how I learned the hardest lesson of my life on a night when my husband's so-called business trip ended in the last place I ever expected, my best friend's bedroom. It began like any other Thursday evening. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes every sound sharper. The tick of the clock, the hum of the fridge, even the creak of the floorboards when I shifted in my chair. My husband, Mark, had told me he was away for a 3-day conference in Chicago. He was supposed to be on a flight home, and I had pasta simmering on the stove, garlic bread in the oven, and a candle lit on the kitchen counter. It was my little ritual, a homecoming meal to remind us both of simpler times. I wanted him to walk through the door, smell the food, and remember that there was still love in this house. I was curled up on the couch, laptop open, half watching an old episode of a sitcom when his phone buzzed on the counter. He had left it behind, something he rarely did. For a moment, I hesitated. I wasn't the kind of wife who checked her husband's phone. I believed in trust, or at least I told myself I did. But the glow of that screen in the dark kitchen pulled me like a magnet. I stood, almost against my will, and picked it up. The message was short. Can't wait for tomorrow night again. Same room? My chest tightened instantly. The sender wasn't saved in his contacts, just a string of numbers, but the words were enough. My breath caught. My hands trembled. My heart thudded so loudly I thought it might rattle the windows. At first, my mind scrambled for excuses. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was business-related. Maybe, just maybe, I was reading too much into it. But then I noticed something else. His phone's location services were still on. With one swipe, the truth hit me like a punch. Mark wasn't anywhere near Chicago. He wasn't even at the airport. He was across town at a hotel, only 15 minutes away. My knees felt weak, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, and all I could think was, how long has this been going on? I didn't leave right away. I sat back on the couch, staring at that tiny blue dot on the map. It blinked, mocking me, daring me to confront reality. My mind replayed all the nights he'd claimed to be working late, the mornings he left with no kiss, the weekends he said were too busy for us. And then another face appeared in my thoughts. My best friend, Hannah. She had canceled dinner with me earlier that night, saying she was too exhausted after work. Her voice had sounded flat, distracted, almost rehearsed. I pushed the suspicion away, but it clawed at me anyway. Finally, I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my keys and drove. The streets were mostly empty, but every red light felt like a wall I had to break through. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might burst before I reached the hotel. When I finally pulled into the lot, the neon sign glowed above me like a cruel joke. I parked far from the entrance, sat in the dark car, and told myself I could still turn back. Pretend I never saw the message. Pretend our life was intact. Pretend Mark was still the man I married. But the moment I stepped out, I knew there was no turning back. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale coffee. My voice shook as I asked the front desk for his room number, but the clerk handed it over without question. I stood in the elevator, staring at the glowing numbers, each ding like a countdown to the end of everything I thought I knew. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched long and dim, the carpet muffling my footsteps. And then I heard it. Laughter. Not just his. Hers too. Hannah's. My stomach twisted violently. That sound, the easy, familiar laughter I had heard countless times during movie nights, sleepovers, and coffee dates, was now tangled with my husband's voice. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open with a trembling hand, and what I saw froze me in place. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, shirt unbuttoned halfway, while Hannah leaned beside him with a glass of wine. Their faces snapped toward me at the same time, wide-eyed, guilty, like children caught stealing. Time seemed to stop. The hum of the air conditioner was suddenly deafening. The smell of wine and cheap hotel soap filled the room. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shatter the glass in Hannah's hand. But instead, I did the one thing none of us expected. I smiled. "So this is your business trip," I whispered. My voice was steady, eerily calm, even though inside me everything was collapsing. Hannah's glass slipped slightly in her hand, and Mark opened his mouth but said nothing. The silence pressed down on us like a weight. I turned, shut the door behind me, and walked back down the hallway. My footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate, as though they belonged to someone else. I didn't cry until I reached the car. And even then, it wasn't the kind of sobbing people imagine. It was quiet, steady, like a leak from a pipe that had been cracked for years. That night, standing in the dark parking lot, I understood something with terrifying clarity. My marriage, my friendship, my entire sense of trust had ended in that hotel room. And though my heart felt like it had been torn apart, I also knew one thing. I would never forget this moment, and I would never forgive them. After that night at the hotel, I drove home in silence. The road stretched endlessly, headlights from other cars blurring into streaks of white and gold that felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's dream. The steering wheel was slick with the sweat of my palms, and I kept replaying every detail in my head: the text message, the blinking location pin, the laughter, the look on their faces when the door swung open. Each replay cut deeper, yet I couldn't stop. It was like pressing on a bruise, just to prove it still hurt. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. The porch light was on, the curtains were drawn, and the candle I had lit hours ago had burned itself into a small pool of wax. Everything was familiar, steady, unchanged, and yet I knew nothing would ever feel the same again. I sat in the car, staring at the front door, my chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Part of me wanted to run inside and tear everything apart, to flip the table, to smash his framed photos, to shatter the illusion that this place was still a home. But another part of me, the quieter, crueler part, whispered, "Pretend. Pretend for one more night that the life you thought you had is still real." So I unlocked the door, stepped into the kitchen, and let the smell of burnt garlic bread hit me like a ghost of my earlier hope. That's when the expectations I had built over years began crumbling one by one. I used to believe marriage was a safe place, a shelter from storms. I believed Mark's late nights were sacrifices for our future, that his distracted smile still carried love, that his silences were born of exhaustion, not secrets. I believed Hannah's friendship was a bond I could lean on without fear, that she was my sister in everything but blood. I believed loyalty was a given, not something you had to question. The truth, though, was merciless. Mark's business trips were excuses. His late nights weren't sacrifices, but rendezvous. His silences weren't exhaustion, but cover. And Hannah, my Hannah, wasn't the friend I thought she was. She wasn't a sister, or even an ally. She was the other half of a betrayal I hadn't been brave enough to imagine. Still, memory can be a tricky thing. As I sat at the table that night, staring at the flickering candle, I remembered how I once pictured his return from trips. I'd imagined the sound of his key turning in the lock, the way his bag would drop by the door, the way he'd lean down and kiss me quickly before taking a plate of food. I used to rehearse the little things I wanted to tell him: what happened at work, a funny story from a friend, even the mundane details about the neighbor's dog digging up the yard again. In my mind, he would listen. In reality, when he did come home, he rarely asked. He'd eat quickly, claim he was tired, and scroll through his phone until he drifted off to sleep. And I had told myself it was fine. I convinced myself that marriage wasn't supposed to feel like the movies, that love was steady and quiet, not fiery and constant. I convinced myself that loyalty was enough, that if I gave him my trust, he would honor it. I convinced myself wrong. What hurt the most wasn't the betrayal itself, but the erosion of every expectation I had clung to. The tiny gestures that once felt comforting, his texts that said working late, Hannah's excuses when she canceled plans, suddenly twisted into weapons. They weren't harmless anymore. They were proof. Proof that I had been living in a carefully built lie. I remember pouring myself a glass of water, watching my hand tremble as the liquid sloshed against the rim. Even the simplest act felt surreal, as though my body was moving, but my mind had detached, hovering somewhere above me. I thought about calling my sister, but the words tangled in my throat. How do you explain that the two people you trusted most had chosen each other over you? How do you explain that your expectations of love and friendship had collapsed in a single night? Instead, I sat in silence, letting the weight of it settle. That's when I realized betrayal doesn't just shatter the present. It reaches backward, staining every memory with doubt. I couldn't think of a single holiday, a single dinner, a single smile without wondering if it had already been tainted. Was he already lying when we went to the beach last summer? Was she already laughing behind my back when she hugged me at my birthday party? Every moment became a question mark, and those question marks gnawed at me more viciously than the truth itself. By midnight, the candle had burned out completely, leaving only smoke curling in the air. I stared into the darkness and whispered to myself, "This is real." My voice sounded strange, unfamiliar, as though it belonged to someone else. Maybe it did. Maybe the Emily who believed in trust and loyalty had ended at that hotel door. What remained was someone new, someone raw and jagged, someone who could no longer afford to expect kindness from the people closest to her. And though I hated it, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never again let my expectations blind me to reality. Looking back now, I realized that what happened in that hotel room wasn't a lightning strike out of nowhere. It was the final collapse of a bridge that had been crumbling for years, stone by stone, piece by piece. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Maybe I had trained myself not to. Maybe ignoring the cracks felt safer than facing the truth. But the truth had been there all along, whispering through small betrayals that I had shrugged off because admitting them would have meant admitting that my marriage and my friendship weren't what I believed them to be. The first crack appeared almost 2 years into my marriage with Mark. He had taken a new job then, one that demanded longer hours and frequent overnight trips. At first, I was proud of him. I bragged to friends about how hardworking he was, how dedicated, but pride soured into loneliness when nights stretched into weeks, and he came home too tired to talk. I remember one night in particular. I had cooked his favorite dinner, even bought a bottle of wine we couldn't really afford at the time. I lit candles, wore a dress he had once said he loved, but when he finally walked through the door, he barely glanced at the table. "I already ate with clients," he mumbled before heading straight to the shower. I laughed it off, told myself it wasn't a big deal. But inside, something small broke. Then there was the time he missed my father's retirement party. My entire family was there, siblings, cousins, even relatives who hadn't visited in years. I kept checking the door, expecting him to appear at any moment, tie loosened, apologizing for being late. He never showed. Later, he claimed his flight was canceled, but when I asked for details, his answers were vague. I didn't push. I told myself travel mishaps happen, that he wanted to be there but couldn't. The problem is, when you excuse someone enough times, you start to excuse yourself too, for being blind, for being quiet, for accepting less than you deserve. Hannah was woven into all those moments. She was the friend who picked me up when Mark didn't. She came over with takeout boxes, a bottle of cheap wine, and stories that made me laugh until my stomach hurt. She was there the night I cried over the retirement party, rubbing my back, saying, "He probably just got stuck, Em. Don't be so hard on him." She was the voice that soothed me, the presence that kept me from falling apart. How could I have suspected that she was already part of the reason I was breaking? Another memory comes to mind. Our 5th wedding anniversary. I had saved for months to book a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains. I imagined the two of us hiking, cooking over a fire, finally reconnecting. The morning we were supposed to leave, Mark said he couldn't go. "Work emergency," he claimed, kissing me quickly before disappearing into his car. I remember sitting on the porch with my packed bag beside me, the weight of disappointment pressing so heavily on my chest that I could hardly breathe. I ended up inviting Hannah instead. She dropped everything, showed up in jeans and a sweatshirt, and said, "Let's make the best of it." We spent the weekend laughing, drinking hot cocoa, and pretending that nothing was missing. But now, when I look back, the laughter feels hollow, tainted. Was she already with him then? Did she cancel plans with other people to spend time with me out of guilt, knowing she was betraying me behind my back? I'll never know. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern a rhythm of absence and excuses that became the background music of my life. Each time, I swallowed my questions. Each time, I told myself not to be dramatic, not to be needy. Mark liked to joke that I was too sensitive, and Hannah often chimed in, telling me to relax, to let things go. And so I did. I let them go, over and over again, until I didn't realize how much I had already lost. The cruelest part of betrayal is how it rewrites the past. I can't look at a single memory without wondering what was real and what was a cover story. I think about the Christmas when Mark surprised me with a necklace. I thought it was proof of his love, but now I wonder if it was guilt wrapped in velvet. I think about the time Hannah drove me to the hospital when I had food poisoning. I thought it was friendship, but now I wonder if it was penance. For years, I convinced myself that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant forgiveness. I believed that if I just gave more, trusted more, endured more, it would balance out. But the truth is, it never balanced. I was carrying the weight alone while they lived double lives in the shadows. By the time I discovered them in that hotel, the foundation had already been eaten away. The affair was just the final push that sent everything crashing down. And maybe that's what hurts most of all. Not just what happened in the present, but the realization that the past I had clung to was never what I thought it was. That night after the hotel, sitting alone in the dark with the candle smoke curling around me, I finally let myself trace the pattern clearly. The missed dinners, the vague explanations, the convenient cancellations, the constant reassurance from Hannah that I shouldn't question too much, the way Mark's eyes darted when I asked direct questions. All of it led here. And as much as it shattered me, a strange clarity came with it. For the first time in years, I wasn't making excuses. I wasn't smoothing over the cracks. I was staring at them head on, admitting what I had always been too afraid to admit. The betrayal had been years in the making, and I had been complicit by refusing to see it. That realization didn't make the pain easier, but it gave me something sharper than hope. It gave me resolve. The night after the hotel discovery, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows of tree branches swaying like skeletal fingers across the walls. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face in that room, the way his expression shifted from surprise to guilt in an instant. I saw Hannah, my so-called best friend, clutching her glass of wine like it might shield her from the truth standing in the doorway. I replayed it over and over, as though punishing myself with the memory would somehow burn it out of me. By morning, the exhaustion felt like lead in my bones, but the anger was sharper than ever. Betrayal doesn't simmer politely. It builds, it presses against your ribs until you feel like you'll shatter if you don't release it. That morning, I decided I was done pretending. Yet Mark came home just after sunrise, dragging his suitcase through the door like nothing had happened. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly mussed, but he smiled in that easy way he always did when he wanted to charm his way out of a question. "Hey, Em," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I turned my head, and his lips brushed the air instead. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch, didn't make an excuse, didn't soften. I met his eyes and held them, letting the silence stretch until his smile faltered. "How was Chicago?" I asked. My voice was flat, colder than I intended, but I didn't care. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "It was good. Busy. You know how those conferences are." He rolled his shoulders, heading toward the kitchen as if the conversation was over. That was always his way. Sidestep, distract, move on before I could press. But this time I didn't let him. "Which hotel did you stay at?" The question hung between us like a blade. He froze, his back to me, his hand still on the refrigerator door. Slowly he turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Why?" "Because I know you weren't in Chicago," I said. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The words landed heavy, deliberate. His face drained of color, and for the first time in a long time, I saw fear flicker across it. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Emily, listen." "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't stand there and lie to me. I was at the hotel. I saw you and her." I didn't have to say Hannah's name. The silence filled it for me. He dragged a hand over his face, his posture sagging as though the weight of his lies had finally caught up. "It's not what you think," he muttered, the oldest excuse in the book. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Really? Because from where I stood, it looked exactly like what I think. My laugh startled even me. It wasn't the sound of someone amused. It was the sound of someone broken, someone who had reached the edge and found there was no ground left. He tried stepping closer, his palms out like he was approaching a skittish animal. Please, let me explain. I stepped back. Explain what? How long it's been? How many trips? How many lies? Or do you want to explain why my best friend of 10 years thought sleeping with my husband was something she could justify? My voice cracked on the last words, but I didn't look away. He flinched as if I had struck him, but I wasn't finished. You both took something from me. Not just a marriage. Not just a friendship. You took away my trust, my sense of safety. You left me questioning every memory, every moment. And you expect me to stand here and let you explain? His shoulders slumped, his eyes falling to the floor. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words thin, fragile, meaningless. Sorry was a bandage on a wound that had already turned septic. Sorry didn't erase the image of his hands on her. Sorry didn't rebuild the years I had lost believing in him. Sorry wasn't enough. I walked past him into the kitchen, grabbing his forgotten phone off the counter. I tossed it onto the table, the message thread with Hannah still open. Here's your explanation, I said, in black and white. He didn't pick it up. He just stood there, frozen, while the reality of his own words stared back at him. That was when I knew this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about dignity. Mine. For years, I had swallowed disappointments, smoothed over cracks, told myself not to push too hard. I had given him the benefit of the doubt until there was no doubt left to give. And now, staring at him in the morning light, I realized the only person who could reclaim what I had lost was me. Pack a bag, I said. My voice was calm, steady. You're leaving. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. What? Emily, wait, we can work this out. There is no we anymore, I said. You made sure of that. You chose her, you chose lies, you chose yourself. But you didn't choose me, not once. He tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. Think about everything we've built, the house, the memories. The lies, I interrupted. That's what we built, a house full of lies. My hands trembled, but I didn't let him see the fear. This wasn't fear of losing him anymore. This was fear of what would happen if I didn't reclaim myself now. He stared at me for a long moment, as though searching for the wife who had once bent, once forgiven, once softened. But she wasn't there anymore. Finally, he turned, trudged upstairs, and closed the bedroom door. I stood in the kitchen, my chest rising and falling, my legs weak beneath me. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't relief. It was grief. Grief for the woman I had been, the life I had believed in, the future that no longer existed. But beneath the grief, a flicker of something else stirred. Resolve. I wasn't done hurting, but I was done being blind. Mark left that morning, but the silence he left behind was anything but peaceful. It pressed against the walls, against my skin, against every corner of the house that had once felt safe. I thought I would feel lighter watching him drive away, suitcase in the trunk, his face pale with defeat. But instead, I felt heavier, as though the weight of 10 years of lies had finally settled on me all at once. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. That chair had been his place for years. Morning coffee, hurried dinners, late-night arguments that never got resolved. Now it was just a chair, wood and fabric, stripped of meaning. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to breathe, but the air felt thick like smoke after a fire. The phone rang before noon. I didn't want to answer, but the sound was relentless, echoing in the hollow house. When I finally picked up, Hannah's name glowed across the screen. My stomach twisted. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some part of me wanted to hear her voice, to see if she could say anything that would make this nightmare less grotesque. Emily, please, she started, her voice high, trembling. It's not what you think. The same line Mark had used, rehearsed and pathetic. Really? I said. Because from where I was standing, it looked exactly like what I think. She went quiet for a moment, then whispered, I didn't mean for it to happen. We were drunk and... Stop. My voice was sharp enough to cut her off. Don't insult me by calling it an accident. Once is a mistake. This was a pattern. You canceled dinners with me because you were with him. You looked me in the eye and lied. You've been lying for months, maybe years. So don't you dare tell me it just happened. I could hear her breathing unevenly, the sound of someone cornered. Emily, I still care about you. You're like my sister. Don't you ever use that word with me again. I snapped. My hand was shaking so badly I had to grip the phone with both hands. A sister doesn't betray you in your own bed, in your own life. You don't get to call yourself my sister anymore. I hung up before she could reply. The silence that followed was deafening, but at least it was mine. Not long after, Mark's family showed up at my door. His mother, his sister, even his cousin. They came in a cluster of worried faces and low voices, as though they could talk me out of what had already been decided. Emily, marriages go through rough patches, his mother said, her hands clasped together like she was praying. Don't throw everything away over a mistake. I stared at her, the absurdity of her words settling like ice in my veins. A mistake? I asked quietly. He betrayed me with my best friend. That's not a mistake. That's a choice, over and over again. His sister tried a different approach. You've built a life together. The house, the memories. Do you really want to start over? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're asking the wrong question. The real question is, do I really want to keep living in a lie? And the answer is no. They shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances, but none of them had an answer. Finally, I opened the door and said, if you're here to defend him, you can leave. If you're here to stand by me, then stay. But I won't listen to excuses anymore. They left one by one, their silence louder than any argument. When the door shut behind them, I leaned against it, my whole body trembling. The confrontation had drained me, but it also gave me clarity. For years, I had let other people's words define my reality. Mark's excuses, Hannah's reassurances, even family members telling me not to be so sensitive. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need anyone else's version of the truth. I had my own, and it was enough. That night, I sat alone on the porch, the cool air brushing against my skin. The neighborhood was quiet, only the sound of crickets and the distant hum of cars on the highway. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for a key in the lock, for a friend to arrive, for someone else to tell me I was enough. I wasn't waiting anymore. The betrayal had broken me, yes. But in the breaking, it had also freed me. In the weeks that followed, the silence in my house slowly changed. At first, it was suffocating, a reminder of everything I had lost. The rhythm of Mark's footsteps upstairs, the sound of Hannah's voice on the phone, the daily fabric of a life I thought I understood. But slowly, that silence began to shift. It became less of an emptiness and more of a space I could claim for myself. I learned how to sit in it without feeling crushed, how to breathe in it without searching for someone else to fill it. I filled it with my own voice, my own choices, my own strength. The hardest part wasn't losing Mark or Hannah. It was losing the version of myself who believed that loyalty meant silence, that forgiveness meant blindness. For so long, I had bent myself into shapes just to keep the peace. I let my expectations of marriage and friendship blind me to what was right in front of me. The truth is, betrayal doesn't just come from the act itself. It comes from the years of small dismissals, the excuses we accept, the questions we don't ask because we're afraid of the answers. And I had been afraid for far too long. I won't lie to you and say healing was quick or easy. Some mornings I woke up feeling like I couldn't move, like the weight of everything was pressing down on my chest. Other days I felt sparks of freedom, walking through the grocery store without glancing at my phone, sitting on my porch and letting the sun hit my face without wondering when he'd come home. Those sparks grew slowly into steady flames, and one day I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. What I learned through all of this is that trust, once shattered, may never look the same again. But sometimes, rebuilding isn't about patching up the ruins. It's about clearing the ground and starting fresh, stronger and wiser than before. I learned that my worth was never tied to Mark's choices or Hannah's betrayal. My worth has always been mine to define. I learned that the voice telling me you deserve better was right all along, and I should have listened sooner. Most of all, I learned that endings, no matter how painful, can also be beginnings in disguise. If you've ever been where I was, sitting in a dark room wondering how you could have been so blind, questioning every memory, doubting every laugh, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not broken. You are not less because someone else failed you. Their betrayal says nothing about your value. It only reveals their weakness, their selfishness, their inability to love with honesty. You can walk away. You can rebuild. You can find peace again, even if it feels impossible in the moment. I never thought I would stand on the other side of this and feel stronger, but here I am, and if I can do it, so can you. My name is Emily Carter, and this was my story. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you for listening, for sharing these hours of truth and reflection. Stories like mine are painful, but they are also powerful because they remind us we are not alone. If you want to hear more stories that pull back the curtain on family secrets, betrayals, and the strength it takes to rise above them, make sure you subscribe. Every story has a lesson, every lesson has a voice, and sometimes hearing that voice can make all the difference. So take this as both a goodbye to the past I left behind and an invitation to join me on the journey ahead. Because the story doesn't end here. It never does. It simply begins again.